being in the police, it's a difficult job.
Yeah.
And has so many different facets. So whilst I'm now not in the police, now I've retired from the police, I understand the difficulties they face every day and the difficulties the public have in that we can't keep people in the police because it's a tough job and it's not for everybody, but it's a necessary job. And so I take my own grief as part of that, thinking, well, working in the police for a long period of time, you have a pretty ordered way of thinking, because you have to.
Yeah.
Particularly dealing with crime scenes, dealing with relatives of people that have lost family members in whatever that might be, a road accident or even a murder. So in the police you have to remain objective, so you can gather evidence and gain an understanding of what went on and produce it in a manner that can be examined in a court, if you will, or by the coroner. But that's all okay, but nothing prepared me personally for the loss of my dad.
Because are you grieving now for that? It was 12 months ago.
Well, I guess that's a difficult question. Yeah, I am. If I'm okay now. I mean, I couldn't sit and talk to you about this because I would cry. And I think you get to a point, there's a process you have to go through. And I, as much as I understand, you can read about these things, but until you experience it yourself, let me wind it back a bit by saying that in 2013 I lost my mum, who was, our family's a very close family, and my own personal family's very close too. So losing my mum, particularly during that we were doing the talent show at the time, Australia's Got Talent, I had a lot of things I had to deal with. So I can look back now, it's almost like watching a video of your own life. I can look back now and think, right, when Mum died, I was in the middle of Australia's Got Talent, my dad had already had a stroke, my dad's now left without his wife, my mum, so I have to deal with him. My brother was uncontrollably grieving, so I had a lot, and I had to organise the funeral. So I had a lot of things that I had to do to make everything work. Lots of boxes to check.
So I had people to look after.
Run the funeral. So I became that person.
You took
almost.
over,
It's not like I was a policeman, but people would say, because I was a policeman, I had the ability to put my own feelings aside and deal with what I had to deal with first. So, funny enough, when my mum died, like yourself, I didn't really grieve when Mum died. I had all these things, organised a funeral, Australia's Got Talent in the background. What am I going to do with my father now? He's had a stroke and now he lives on his own. How do I deal with that? So I put some things in I put some processes together to deal with what was going on in Dad's life and look after Mum's funeral and whatnot, and run the talent show thing. And then there was a point, I remember this particular night, I went to my dad's house, because we'd been sleeping at my dad's house after Mum died, but didn't want to leave him alone. And I remember being with everybody and kind of feeling like I was taking care of everybody, but then I walked out of the house, walked out into the front yard. I remember the night like it was yesterday, and I just started crying, and I was howling crying. And I think that release of energy, because I'd bottled it up so much, I was very close to Mum. And it's funny that it had not gone from my memory, but that's buried in my memory. My wife came out and wasn't really sure what to do with me because I couldn't control the grief that I had. So that was okay with Mum. That was a short monograph. Then as time went on, after Mum had gone, I had Dad to look after, and I almost, this is the thing about grief, I almost felt guilty that I didn't feel so bad, a bit like you with your dad. But I had grieved somewhat for my mum. But I felt a bit bad that I wasn't crying and I wasn't upset. And I thought, well, why am I, when someone means so much to you, why can't you show an emotion about that person?
You're sort of battling against your emotions where you think you should be more emotional, but you're not. Something like that.
I think you feel bad about not showing,
not feeling bad.
An impression. You should feel bad about it. You should be crying about this. Well, one, I guess I didn't have time to a point, and there were times when I did cry about Mum, but as time gets on, you feel a bit healed and you think, people always say to you, remember the good times. Remember those people for what they are. That's a really important thing in my life. I mean, I don't know that other people might feel the same way as maybe we feel, but then that still didn't prepare me to lose Dad. So when Dad went, because he was living across the road. We're here, we're in my house. He was right across the road in an old folks' home. He would come here every day. Had an electric wheelchair, so I saw him and spoke to him every day.
Yes.
And then when he got a little bit sick, he had quite a colourful life. After he had his stroke, we called him the cat with 9 lives. He fell on his face. He got septicemia. He was really sick. His heart had a problem. He was in the hospital over Christmas one year.
And still survived.
We thought he was going to die every time we went to hospital, because he's in his 80s. And I might say, a remarkable man. He was not travelling so well, not eating very much. That's what happens. That's a sign there. These are signs that we don't pick up.
Yeah.
So anyway, what happened with Dad was he was doing okay, doing really good. Then he started not eating very well, and still okay. His weight went down a bit, so I was conscious of that. And I was running a conference for the police at the time, and I have a busy life. I was reviewing some shows for Cabaret Festival, and Dad had a couple of little trips to the hospital the week before he died, and that was like, he's having a bit of trouble breathing, wasn't so good, but they kept sending him home. So if they send you home, you think, well, that's okay. So then on the Thursday night, so that would have been the 15th of June last year, they rang me. They would always ring me if there was an issue. That's a good thing about old folks' homes. If they'll ring you if there's an issue with your family, they'll ring you straight away.
Yeah.
So they rang me. They said, Dad's going back to the hospital again. He's having a bit of trouble breathing. I said, okay. I raced back on my bike from the city, got to the home, just around the corner here, and he was still there. They were just putting him in the ambulance. So I sat with him and talked to him when they put him in the ambulance. He was okay, talking to me like we're talking now. A little bit short of breath, but okay. So then I followed the ambulance to the hospital. I stayed in the hospital with him till midnight, and then I said to him, we all think this with our family, don't we? Everything's going to be okay. I said to Dad, I'll stay. He said, no, don't stay. Go home. You come back in the morning. I'll be fine.
Yeah.
He actually spoke to me like that. And I said, are you sure you're okay? I remember holding his hand, looking into his eyes, and I was kind of testing him to see if he was okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, should I stay or should I go? But he wanted me to go, so I went. So 2 hours later, they phoned me, and they said, your dad's just passed away.
Oh my God.
I was in bed. I'd gone to sleep. I was tired. It was now about, it must have been 2 o'clock in the morning, or close to that. And I woke up and they said, it's the Royal Adelaide Hospital, your dad's just passed away. And
how did he eventually pass away? What did he die of?
He had pneumonia.
Time? Right, okay. But he was okay 2 hours beforehand when he was talking to you?
Yeah, but he must have had pneumonia at that point. So he's in the emergency, they haven't diagnosed it.
Of course,
But that was a slow, I guess,
slow
decline
from that point
over that week.
Yeah.
I guess they didn't look at it that much. And 89, I mean, people say, well, that's a good age, isn't it? That's okay. It's okay to die at 89. Yeah, it is okay, but it's not your dad.
No, absolutely.
And you didn't speak to him every day.
Yeah.
And you didn't become the person that your dad was to you. But
so when you got that phone call, what happened? What happened to you?
Was one of the worst phone calls I've ever had. That's a really good question, Mark. Because I again, it's like watching a video playback. I sat up bolt upright in bed and I screamed. Well, I said no, and I said to the person, no. I calmed myself for a second. I said, I remember saying this to them. You've got the wrong person. I was with my father 2 hours ago. What are you talking about? My dad is fine. So I then, when the penny dropped that this was a final thing, I just started crying uncontrollably. My wife was beside herself, didn't know what to do with me. And I raced back to the hospital. When I got back to Dad, his hands were still warm. We're 10 minutes from the hospital here. I raced back there.
And what did you think when you saw him?
Funny, dead people don't look like the people that are alive. So they almost look like, my impression of that is they almost look like, when you go to Madame Tussauds and you see wax dummies? Yeah. That's what, sounds horrible, that's what dead people look like, because they're motionless and very still. But I was in a unique situation. I think a lot of people would be like me. I had no unresolved business with my father. Nothing. We didn't have a cross word. There was no, I wish I'd said that, I wish I'd said this, I wish I... So, we all say this. If I could have one more minute, what would I pay for one more minute with my father, my mother, my brother, my sister, my best friend?
That's a good question.
But I didn't feel that. I felt, I was started to grieve because he wasn't there. And I did cry. I was okay. But I was more about seeing him and allowing myself to understand that he wasn't there anymore. The worst of it was for me, I thought, well, this is okay, I can deal with this. But then I went back to work after 2 weeks, and I sat in my office, and I had been upset. And I think everyone deals with grief in their own way.
Yes, yeah.
And mine was quite unique and different. And I feel this, maybe that's part of being in the cops for a long time. I felt I couldn't pass my grief off to my family. So
just explain, what do you mean by that?
I couldn't rationalise it by saying, I mean, I cried at home, but I couldn't make them understand how I was feeling. I was just upset all the time. I was just crying.
Yeah.
So I couldn't verbalise it.
Do you think you were depressed?
No.
You were sad for the loss of your father.
I understand that. I do understand. I've had a lot to do with depression over the years, dealing with other people's depression, and certainly in the police and with other people I know. No, it wasn't. It's not a feeling of depression. It was a
sense of loss.
An intense feeling of loss. It's not like you lost your keys.
Yeah.
It's kind of my heart. It's, you know, isn't it funny? We sing songs. You know, I'm a singer. We sing songs about love and loss, and we sing it. There's always hearts involved. But inside my chest, my heart was hurting. Yeah. I had physical pain there. It would squeeze me up how bad I felt.
So were you able to do your job?
Well, that's the interesting part. So I was saying that. So I went back to work.
And this is after 2 weeks?
After 2 weeks, I went back to my work, sat in my office, and I was in a reasonably stressful environment, which I'm not saying that was problematic, because I was in the cops for a long time and I had a certain set of skills that allowed me to do that job, like we all have. But I sat in my office and I was working. I was able to do my job, but I was just sad, like a real feeling of sadness in the pit of my chest, and I would cry. So I'm not howling crying. I'll just be sitting here with you now. I'll be sitting not in front of people. Yeah. But I'll be sitting there in my office. I'll be typing something, and I'll just have tears streaming down my face. And it wasn't something I could stop.
Wow.
My boss came and saw me. He said, "Look, you're not doing very well here, right?" And then I really.
So he noticed it.
He was great, and that's one good thing about the cops. Real team environment I worked in. They knew me. They knew that my mother was Irish, so we're emotional people to start with. But when he said, "You're not doing so well," it was like someone else would, okay, let's push the start button. Let's go from just being teary to really crying. And he said to me, so I was in a quiet place with him, and we're good at that. We're good at that in the cops. Some people say we're not. We're good at looking after our people when you've got the right people. My boss was a great guy. So he said to me, "Steve, I think you need to go home. Take some more time. You're clearly not over this." So,
were you able to do your job well, though?
Well, I mean,
like, were you sort of?
Yeah, well, no, I was okay.
You weren't spinning the wheels on your job.
No. I was fine with that.
But you were just struggling.
It was just the emotion.
Yeah,
I was able to do my job, and I had to do my job because I worked in an area where, I'm not going to go into that today, but I worked in an area that could be very complicated. And could be very dynamic. Yeah, no, so I had to be able to perform.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah. I could go out in the street and do my job without crying, but I'd find in a quiet place, I'd sit down, and the memories would flood of actually the sense of pure loss would come to me in waves. People talk about waves. Emotions come in waves, and those waves would overlap each other. I couldn't get out of it. Yeah. So I went home, and then for another 2 weeks I went home. That's 4 weeks now since Dad's gone. I thought, what am I doing now? So I still wasn't doing so well, and so I said to my wife, I think we need to take off. I feel the need to go and see my other family, my dad's brothers and sisters, and be kind of a representative of my father to them, to say because they've lost a brother.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And an uncle, whatever. So I said, well, let's go to England. I just need to get away. So sometimes I think this is a really, really good thing for grief. Disconnect yourself from a situation where you have to deal with everything except yourself. So I had Yvonne with me, my wife, Pillar, like stood beside me. My family were great, my kids. But funny enough, my brother, who's normally an emotional wreck, when we lost my dad, he became this strong guy. And I'm thinking, I was almost cross with him because I thought, you're an emotional wreck, you cry at the drop of a hat. Dad's dead, you're not crying at all. Bit like you, nothing. There was no tears. And I think part of that was because I was suffering so much from grief. I was really, they could see I was suffering. Because I would wake up in the morning, I'd wake up out of bed crying. I would go to sleep crying. It was that bad. That sounds unreasonable, doesn't it? Does that sound irrational?
No, it doesn't. Not that at all. I was just thinking, yeah, no tears for me with Dad, which I said earlier. The only time I ever cried with Dad, after he passed away, was when I got the bill for the funeral. It was really expensive.
Outrageous?
It was just over the top.
What, you didn't think about digging a hole in the back garden?
No, and we probably, in the end...
My cat's buried in the front garden.
We wanted to save cost. We probably should have had a casket. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
So the long and the short of that was, I decided to go away and see family. And we went to Norway and did a lovely cruise in Norway. I just felt I needed a release. But the key to this was, before that, I thought, well, I'm going to go away and I'm going to see Dad's family. I'm still not dealing with this. I said to Yvonne, this is not getting any better. I said, I'm going to have to go back to work at some stage. I can't keep taking time off. But I decided I'd take 10 weeks off work.
Wow.
I've already been off 4.
Wow.
Lots of long service leave.
Yes.
So I thought, I'm going to just take off for 10 weeks. And we'll go to Europe for 6 weeks. We'll come back. We'll do this. So before I went, I thought, well, there's no point in going feeling like this, feeling as bad as I do. So I thought, rationally thought, if I wasn't me, what would I tell me to do? And that was, I discussed this with a friend of mine, and they said to me, why don't you go and see a grief counsellor? And I thought, I am a grief counsellor. What do I need to go and see a grief counsellor for? I mean, I've done that my whole life. I've been the guy that people come to when they've got problems.
Well,
and that's a nice feeling.
That's half the problem, though.
Yeah.
In the end, I'm sure that'll be half the problem.
Yeah, maybe.
Because we want to help others.
We don't help ourselves.
We don't help ourselves, and in the end, we can't help others as well as we should be able to, or that we would like to, because we're not helping ourselves.
So, look, picture this. I'm not going to name this person, but it's funny, right? So, I decide I'm going to go see a grief counsellor. I'm not going to name the person, but I'll describe the person to you. So, it's over in Unley Way. So, it cost me $160. Now, I'm cross about that already. I'm thinking, why am I wasting $160 to go and talk to some peanut about my dad? They know nothing about my family. Why would I bother? I thought, okay.
I think a lot of people have that view.
It's
until they get there, and then if it works, it's okay.
It's like when I decided to quit smoking. My friend had been to a hypnotist, and I thought, what a load of nonsense. I went to the hypnotist. I think it was $100 a visit. I went the first time. Went to the hypnotist, and he went, woo, smoking's bad, smoking's bad, don't smoke. I went out and had a cigarette on the way out.
Yeah.
As I couldn't light up quick enough as I was leaving the hypnotist. I went back there 3 times. After the 3rd time, and I should refer you to this person.
Well, I think you told me about this.
I came home after the 3rd time. I thought, what a load of rubbish. This has cost me $300. I could have bought 5 packets of fags for that.
Yeah.
Came home, had my cigarette. I only had 1 in the packet left. Cigarette, I put it out. I never had a cigarette.
Isn't that interesting? Isn't that, wow, yeah.
So it kind of worked for me. Yeah, so anyway, I'll go back to the grief counsellor. So made an appointment, went over there. It was just a little old house. Walked inside. It was a nice sort of lounge. So it felt like a bit like Analyse This.
Yes.
You know, like De Niro and Billy Crystals. Except it was a female. So she's kind of dressed up like Whistler's mother. So picture this, got a little cardigan on. I mean, she hasn't got a bonnet on, but she's kind of an older lady. When I say old, I'm 61. She's probably 50, but she looked like she was 80. I think it was something to do with the dresses. So I don't want to insult the person because she was lovely, really nice. But you got to get a picture in your mind. It's not a young person. It's not a really old person, but it was kind of a really
sort of dressed older.
Yeah,
more,
maybe dressed in an old sort of
old style.
But a very inoffensive person. You would and again, I don't mean this with any amount of disrespect to her, but you would pass this person in the street and you wouldn't remember seeing them.
Yeah.
She was just innocuous, so, not a bother to anyone. Anyway, come in, sit down. What can I call you? Steve? Steve's okay, yeah, sit down. So then for an hour and a half, I sat with her, and it didn't take much. I could be her. In fact, I'd love to be a grief counsellor, a full-time grief counsellor. She said, very simply, tell me how you're feeling. Well, that just opened the door. Now, the reason it opened the door for me, Mark, is this. I felt I couldn't express all those feelings to my family. I couldn't dump that on them. They've got their own grief to deal with. So I thought, well, I want to talk to this person. So for an hour and a half, I was a bit angry. I was very sad. I cried. I laughed. I spoke through all the range of emotions I had. After an hour and a half, I got up and left. I thought, well, that was a complete waste of time.
Oh, so okay.
But it wasn't. It wasn't a waste of time at all. Because when I left, I felt a bit offloaded. I don't know how...
It was cliche, but...
You know when you bring the shopping bags in for the shop?
Yeah, and then you put them down.
You put them down and go...
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, of
God,
course.
right. I felt a bit like that.
Yeah.
I felt a bit like
Yeah.
I've unloaded some stuff that I couldn't get rid of. And then I thought, now I'm going to go and see my dad's family. And I know I'm going to be upset when I talk about my dad, but I'm going to be able to help them deal with their grief.
Yes.
I could then say, this isn't as bad as it sounds. So what happened was then the crying didn't become every day. After that, it was almost like a turning point for me. I think because I decided I was going to do something about it, rather than just sit there and wail and cry, I was able to move to a point where I could start to deal with it. Now, we're having this conversation today. I honestly, you can ask my wife about this. You know, you can ask Yvonne about
Bruce, just pass me the water. Keep rolling.
You can ask Yvonne about about this. You know how bad it was and how much it changed after that trip, and how after a period of time there is a real healing time with grief. And you know, even you listening to me talk about it today, whilst I don't cry now about it, I still have grief. But saying it out loud to you, and because you're my friend as well,
Helps.
it really does help. So the interesting thing about that is, so I think I ended up having a pretty textbook manner of dealing with my grief. Recognise it, allow yourself to grieve, talk to someone about it.
You learned about it.
I kind of, and I didn't go to a book and say,
No.
what do I do? But when I look now, if I looked on the internet now and said, what are the stages of dealing with grief? Those things that I did kind of fell into the right boxes.
So how are you now? 12 months on.
I'm in a better place. You know, I've got my dad was mad for cars. So I've got the old E-Type, and for the first 6 months after Dad, let me say this about the car. Dad was mad for Jaguars. We had a nice E-Type Jag convertible, and I took Dad out in it every weekend when he could. So we would go out every time I was off on the weekend. I'd take him out, we'd go out for lunch. He always wanted the cheapest lunch. He'd want Domino's. I'd say, Dad, we'll go somewhere nice for lunch. No, I want KFC or Domino's, whatever he could get for $5 or $6. He had enough money, but they don't like spending it. But he'd be in the car with me all the time, and I'd look over. He never drove the E-Type that's here. I'd be driving, I'd look over, he'd be there, and we'd have an ice cream. That was our thing. I'd always say to him, we'd go to Rundle Street. Every Saturday or Sunday, we'd go to Rundle Street for an ice cream. And I'd get him an ice cream. I'd say, Dad, do you want an ice cream? He'd say, no. And I'd get him an ice cream, and he'd eat every bit of it. And we'd have a laugh, and people come and look at the car. So anyway, for the first 6 months the car's here, I couldn't sit in the car. I couldn't get in it. I couldn't get in it without crying.
Oh yeah, you told me about this. Yeah.
So then, I don't know what the date was, but I could look back on the logbook and see what date it was I took the car out. But I took my brother out in the car.
This was the first time that you'd done it?
First time I took my brother
since
out.
Your dad passed?
Yeah, I took him out in the car, and it was more than 6 months. I would sit in the car and I'd just be teary. And then 6 months after he passed, I took him out in the car, put my brother out, and it was sort of okay. And then 2 weeks ago, we had the Jag Nationals, the Jag Day at Glenelg, and I took my son. And for the first time, I was almost teary. I sort of held back the tears. I let my son drive the E-Type.
Fantastic.
First time he'd ever driven.
Beautiful.
My oldest boy drove me home in the
Lovely,
car.
lovely.
And I looked over, and I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I was thinking, I'm Dad. He's me, and I'm him. Oh, now you didn't remind me about what I wanted to say before we quit. See, you're just not that bright, are you, really? I said, remind me about something. What was important?
Oh, what was that?
I know, because I have a still memory.
Yeah, but you see now, the point is, the whole idea of you saying remind me was pointless because I can't remember it. So in the end, you're the one that reminded yourself of it.
Why do I have to do that? Why is it?
No, well, but remember I told you earlier that
you can't remember anything.
I can't. Well, I just don't have a great memory. So you saying earlier.
So how did that work in media if you don't have a good memory?
I'm not sure. But the point I'm making is when you said to me earlier, remind me of this. Remember I said to you, no, that's not a good idea
Well,
because
how
I'm not
come
going
you
to
can
remember.
that?
Yeah,
You
I
can't
can remember
what to remind
that,
of.
but I can't remember what you told me to remind you. Can you remember?
I remember
What is
exactly.
it?
So that is that. Out of all that, and
There's 20 seconds we'll never get back.
I did say this is that I decided that. So I drove the car, took my son. I decided that I was going to take my children and their partners, and my wife, myself, my brother, and his wife to Sri Lanka, where my father was born.
Yes.
And I had been there, and I'd been to the house that my dad grew up in, one of 6 kids that had a 2-bedroom house, tiny little house it was, in what's called Colombo 6. And what I did was I walked them through what my dad's life looked like as a young man and how he lived. I took them inside the house that he lived in with his 5 brothers and sisters, and I took them all around the country to understand the culture of Sri Lanka and what it's like and how gentle and warm the people are and what it would have taken my father if he did it today, what it would have taken him today to leave Sri Lanka and go to live in London, how difficult that would have been. So I wanted to give my kids a sense of understanding that, and I say this to my kids, that everything matters, everything. So what you're talking about with your father about, like, you didn't grieve in the way that I grieved, but what I'm trying to say is our parents and our parents' parents and all of those that come before us make us what we are today.
Yeah.
So I really made my kids understand that. My kids embraced the language. My son was trying to learn how to speak Sinhalese now, and they understand that the reason we have a good life here and we can sit out in the backyard by the pool or living in a beautiful place like Adelaide, which is so different than anywhere else in the world. And so whilst things are expensive here, life is not a struggle here for most people.
No.
There are people that struggle, and I appreciate that. But I made them understand the importance of those that come before us. So that's a constant reminder for me of what my mother and my father did for us to give us the life we have, to allow me to sit here and talk. But for my mother and father, we couldn't have this conversation.
No, very true.
Simply. I mean, when you go down to those atoms, we don't exist only because of what came before us. So if you don't remember, I took my kids so we took my dad's ashes back to Sri Lanka, some of them.
Yes.
And we put them in my grandfather and grandmother's grave. But I showed my children my great 5 generations of my family's graves in this graveyard.
Oh, wow.
We went there and visited it, and they could see that in the sort of 1700s, 1600s, that my family were there. And I said, that is you. That's part of you.
Wow.
It's not a distant relative or something I've never seen.
So they're all in this one grave?
They're all in one place.
Wow.
Yeah, they're all in the one cemetery. Yeah. So our family dates back to Sweden, to a place called Högbo in Sweden. In the 1600s, they were merchant seamen. So, you know, what happened in Sri Lanka, the Dutch invaded Ceylon, as it was back then, and the English came, and, you know, the Portuguese were there. So it was quite a melting pot of different cultures. But I just found it interesting. So I say that what to finish this off is, I will always remember my father, and I will always remember my father not just with love, because that's my feeling. I can't give you that feeling. But what I try to give others is a great amount of respect for what he was able to achieve in his life, and that he was able to, certainly in later life, I always had a good relationship with him. But in later life, for him, he was able to understand his own emotions a lot better, because he was kind of taught not to have them. Work hard, make money, look after your family. Don't worry about how you feel about that stuff. That's what that generation was like.
Just do all those things.
Get on with it.
And
then that's why a lot of people end up going down the pub and drinking half their life away, because they're so busy working they don't think about their own mental health. And that's a whole other subject, isn't it? Mental health.
Well, look, that's. I'm pleased. I'm pleased you're well. I don't know what that noise is.
They're just digging a hole to put you in after this interview.
I'm pleased we had a chat about that.
You know what? I'm really pleased that we've done this.
You haven't got any? You got any lozenges?
I probably have.
All right, let's do.
There's a small cost involved.
Let's
I'm
do
sure I
that.
could find something.